This is Frank Islam, Chairman and CEO of FY Investment Group, and your host of Washington Calling. We'll be interviewing leading voices from business and politics that impact you, the viewer. Today, we are fortunate to have a distinguished guest, and his name is Mayank Chhaya. I may not have pronounced it correctly, but I think I have done my best.
Who lives in Chicago. You were spot on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chhaya. Who lives in Chicago, is a Chicago-based veteran and very respected journalist, an author and filmmaker. He does it all. He's the writer and director of a documentary known as Gandhi's Song. He's also an authorized biographer of Dalai Lama, His Holiness, who I admire and appreciate a lot. Thank you for coming to our show, and welcome to our show. It's nice to see you.
Likewise, it's a great pleasure to be invited. Thank you very much.
So let me start out by asking you, as Khurram suggested, tell us who you are, your successful career, your remarkable journey that you had for our audience, which is global.
I was born in a city called Ahmedabad in the western Indian state of Gujarat. Famously, that's where Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi perfected his political movement in his ashram called Gandhi Ashram. I was born there in 1961. I've been a journalist now for 42 years. Began my career in Bombay with a newspaper called the Free Press Journal. It was Bombay then, it's Mumbai now. Graduated to the Associated Press, which is the AP, the American news agency. From there, I jumped to India Abroad and India Abroad News Service in Bombay for a while. And then I was transferred to New Delhi as their South Asia chief correspondent in 1989, from where I reported from India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. These three countries were my beats. So I used to travel to both Sri Lanka and Pakistan quite a bit. I came to the US in 1998 to take over a newspaper on the West Coast. Subsequently founded a multimedia company which was funded by a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. Unfortunately, after a couple of years, it couldn't survive because of media pressures. I moved to New York, again, taking over another newspaper in New York, was there for 3 years or so, and finally moved to Chicago in the interest of my children's education, and I've been here since then. So that's the broad stroke introduction of who I am.
Wonderful story. Thank you very much for sharing with our audience. As I understand, you had a very successful career, including as a filmmaker. I did not realize that. And you have worked on the world's two greatest spiritual leaders, Mahatma Gandhi and His Holiness Dalai Lama. Why did you choose these two leaders? And tell us about, is the documentary done? And is your publication on Dalai Lama is done? Because I have a lot of admiration for those two people.
Well, to answer quickly, both were done quite some time ago. The Dalai Lama book, which was originally titled Man, Monk, Mystic, was published in the US in 2007 by Doubleday Random House. And since then, it has been published in 25 languages, including in Arabic. And wow. It continues to sell reasonably well now after these many years. And the Gandhi documentary was done 4 years ago. It's called Gandhi's Song, but it's a bit of a misnomer because I'm using Gandhi's currency to introduce one whom I consider one of the world's greatest poet philosophers. It's called Narasimha Mehta, who is a 15th century writer and poet who wrote the famous song Vaishnava Janato, which Gandhi adopted as his moral compass. So my fascination with both, at one level, these are such obvious figures that they become cliches. But at the same time, they continue to have such extraordinary relevance. Gandhi, in Gandhi's case, 75 years after his death, and in the case of the Dalai Lama, very much within his lifetime. I mean, as you know, Dalai Lama will turn 88 this July 6th. And of course, there is no comparison between the two in terms of their historic consequence, but one can reasonably argue that the Dalai Lama is, in a way, a successor to Gandhi on the question of exercising morality and compassion in public life. There is so much about the two of them that already existed before I came to them that I had to take a different approach. So in the Dalai Lama's case, I examined his life from three vantage points: him as a man, him as a monk, and him as a mystic, and hence the title of my book. In the case of Gandhi, my fascination was more with the bhajan, the song Vaishnava Janato,
I do not
which,
know. What did that
which
mean?
Vaishnava Janato means it talks about a refined, dignified human being is one who understands the pain of others,
Okay.
anguish of others,
Okay.
who's non-judgmental, who is not greedy. It's a pretty secular moral benchmark written 600 years ago by this uh,
But this fellow
semi-lettered poet,
Narsingh Mehta, you said Narsingh Mehta?
Narsi Mehta, yes.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
what
Go
has
ahead. Go ahead.
happened is the song has come to be identified with Gandhi as if Gandhi wrote it. And
Right.
most people don't know that he did not write it. It was written 400 years before he was born. So he merely adopted it in 1905 as his moral compass. And the documentary looks at how a single song was at the heart of India's independence movement, courtesy of Mohandas Gandhi, because he regarded that as his guiding song all his life. And
So when was the documentary shown in the United States and other part of the world as well?
what happened was I tried to sell it to various people, including Netflix and a whole lot of others. They all liked it very much, but when I approached them at that point, they said it wasn't fitting with their slate of
Right,
things that they
right.
were doing. So, out of sheer exasperation, I decided to release it free on YouTube, and it has been extremely well received so far, critically and in terms of audience response. So, it is free on YouTube.
Okay. And all my interviews is on YouTube, and I'm sure you have seen it.
I've seen them, yes.
So since you already talked about Mr. Mehta and who was born in 17th century, he was there?
15th century,
Oh, long
1414
time
to
ago, long time.
1480. Yeah.
So before Mughal came to India.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about why has Mahatma Gandhi been forgotten by today's leaders in India as he taught and preached all of us the values and the vision that we firmly believe in, the freedom of faith, respect for human rights, intercaste harmony, and impact and influence of nonviolence all over the globe. Even our own Dr. Martin Luther King embraced the nonviolence, and this is how he started the civil rights movement. And both have been Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King has been beacon to me in my personal life, in my philanthropic engagement. As Mahatma Gandhi told us, you must be the change you wish to see in the world. And Dr. King advised us, every man must decide whether he will walk into the light of the creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. Very well said. And I just gave an award to my friend Senator Van Hollen on the day of Martin Luther King and also Keith Ellison when I hosted the event for Martin Luther King. So that was not the question. So tell us a little bit about why the current leaders have departed from from Mahatma Gandhi's teaching. They're not embracing it.
Yeah, but the reason is pretty simple because symbolism and rituals are easy to emulate and not the actual conducts that propel them. It's true that Gandhi stood throughout his life for interfaith harmony and, in a sense, laid down his life for that.
Yeah,
but he also witnessed one of the world's worst interfaith conflagrations in the run up to India's independence. I'm talking about the partition, of course. I believe the impulse for conflict is intrinsic to humans, just as the impulse for harmony is. The question is how well we moderate the former and strengthen the latter. One has to remember that Gandhi was a product of a radically different era, up against a heartless colonial predator. He had to think of grand political, social, cultural, and moral ways to defeat that rather sinister force that we know has the British East India Company and eventually as the British Raj. Today, in many ways, we are up against ourselves rather than an identifiable force. When you're fighting yourself, that's where the problem comes. And
what are you fighting yourself? Explain to us a little bit about what are you fighting for yourself?
The current conflict stems from a set of factors which I would say ignorance, prejudice, uh, intolerance about other people's way of life or even way of dressing, for instance. It comes down to that trivial reality. I think going by all that, India has still managed to do exemplary well in terms of remaining by and large intact. Like we were discussing earlier, there are serious dissensions and fissures and fault lines, which have clearly become bigger since in the last 7, 8 years. But it still remains at its core a fundamentally liberal, accepting civilization that it has been for more than 5,000 years.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, so that's where I come down on.
Well, you express this very well. Let me shift the gears and talk about your writing on Dalai Lama's biography, His Holiness. How do you see the elements of Dalai Lama's teaching of peace, and also what's going on in terms of the war in the places such as Ukraine, which India does not is still a challenge because of the Russia and other places in the world. And as His Holiness Dalai Lama, as you know, he thinks himself as the person who speaks for Tibet, and he says that and he lives in Dharamshala in India after he left the Tibet. So tell us a little bit about Dalai Lama so that we know a little bit about more. He's everybody knows for our audience purpose, but for your own view, what do you think of him? How do you describe him?
He is an extraordinary figure from 2, 3 standpoints. One is, of course, what appeals to me the most is his steadfast commitment to compassion and warm-heartedness, as he calls it, coupled with a tremendous sense of joy about life. When you meet him, the first thing that would strike you is that the man is joyous about sentient life, not just human sentient life, but life generally, be it a tree or be it an animal or be it any number of things. There is a certain sense of joy that he exudes. And I think that was for me the starting point of knowing what he stands for. I mean, otherwise, it's a fantastic story which is mixed with mysticism, mixed with adventure. I mean, to think that a 3-year-old boy gets picked up as the next Dalai Lama on the basis of the fact that he remembered some of the personal effects of the 13th Dalai Lama, and from there to come to a massive 900-chamber palace called the Potala Palace in Lhasa, then in 1950, beginning to confront China and its strong tactics, and then in 1959, eventually having to flee in the face of very serious threats to his life, dressed up as a common soldier, and then arriving in India. And since then, 1959, he has been in McLeodganj, Dharamshala, permanently grateful to India's hospitality for these many decades. And he says repeatedly that he owes everything he is to what India has done for him. He sees India as his karma bhumi, as it were.
Very well said. So why China so afraid of this religious and spiritual leader? And they think of he's a separatist and anti-China. And I heard what his people for Chinese say, wolf in monk's clothing.
Yes.
But the fact of the matter, he himself calls he's a simple Buddhist and he speaks for the rights of the people of Tibet. Why so Chinese are so afraid of? Not that I'm a fan of China.
I understand.
Because I believe that I believe in democracy. They have dictatorship.
Right. I think primarily it is his ability to break down dogmas without being judgmental that a totalitarian system like China or any other fears the most. You have to remember that Buddhism's central tenet is knowledge and inquiry.
Yes.
It's not a religion in any sense of the word. It does not believe in an exalted entity that people call God. It never has. the primary force that drives Buddhism is intellectual inquiry, something that a totalitarian system would find it very threatening. And the Dalai Lama embodies that idea of Buddhist inquiry and knowledge, and that is deeply unsettling for Beijing.
That's very well said. So the Buddhism is started from India, from the Indus River, as I understand.
Yes.
And it started where the Pakistan is located right now, because that's where the culture.
No, Buddhism began at the foothills of the Himalayas, which is what is now Nepal. That's where Gautam Buddha was born, in the foothills of the Himalayas. And that's where it began 2,500 years ago. It's been a long time. He lived to the age of 84, if history is any record. And his entire life was essentially dictated by questioning everything around him. He, in fact, used to tell even his followers, I say it in quotes because he did not believe in followers, that if you cannot question constantly, there is a problem. You have to question everything, including me. You are not here to follow anyone. It's your mind. You will eventually decide what the world is. Only you can decide. No one else can decide for you. So that's how it started.
What year was it, Mayank, with regard?
It was 500 years before current era.
Before Christ was born, right?
Yeah.
So a long time ago.
A very long time ago. And so many of those profound concepts which people talk about now were founded then by Gautam Buddha.
I want to change the shift the gears, I guess, to talk about the present state of U.S.-India relationship. As I think that do you believe that India and U.S. enjoy a close relationship, and they see eye to eye on items such as counterterrorism, bilateral trade, multi relationship, and economic relations and nuclear cooperations? But there are some tension with the United States and India with regard to the Russian relations.
Yes.
What's going on in Ukraine? Do you believe that India and U.S. relationship is founded on shared values and shared commitment to democracy? And I would like you to shed some bright lights on Indian diaspora, who plays a major role in making sure that India can achieve its fullest potential. And also there could be the vital resource in healthcare, innovations, philanthropy, education, skills development, creating jobs, and creating companies. Tell us a little bit about it.
Before I come to the overall India-US relations, let me just point out someone I'm interacting with right now. You are sitting in the heart of Washington, D.C., and for a long time, you yourself have contributed so much in terms of strengthening India-US ties from your vantage point, through your philanthropy, through your technological work, through your educational work. And there are people of Indian extraction across America who have done that. But since you live in Washington, D.C., you have a special perch where you can make such a profound impact. And I know for a fact that who's who of Washington is a regular at your residence.
They do. But the fact I'm deeply grateful of your what you said, and thank you very much for your kind and thoughtful words. We deeply appreciate it very much. I do. I am Indian American. I believe that we need to take the relationship between the two countries to the next height. But we need to also make sure they understand that we are still experimenting the democracy with the oldest democracy in the world.
Right. To come to US-India relations, since 2004, when the government of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was in place in Delhi, US-India relations have very steadily and strongly improved over the last 18, 19 years to a level now where both of us are like a well-oiled dynamic system, which instinctively understand each other. At the same time, they are mindful of disagreements that have always been there. For instance, you talked of Ukraine and India's position on that. Although India's position has been pretty clear on Ukraine. People have to remember that Russia, then the Soviet Union, I'm talking about from the 50s onward, was the only major power that stood by India throughout the decades of 50s, 60s, 70s, and even 80s. It's a very deep historic relationship which India cannot just throw away. And that's one of the reasons why they've had to do a fine rope walking on the question of Ukraine. And I think US understands that. And given the fact that India is now poised, it's already the world's 5th largest economy, on way to becoming perhaps the 3rd largest after India, the US and China. I think they recognize that it's always important to have a country of that size demographically and economically on its side. Especially, you must have seen the visit by Xi Jinping to Moscow to meet Vladimir Putin, where they once again asserted that they are emerging as the new axis against the US in many ways. Given that situation, I think apart from the strategic nature of the US-India relations, I think it's also become somewhat utilitarian at this stage, because the US would absolutely like India to be in its corner as a sort of a counter to China, both demographic and economic. So I think this is a relationship which can only go up. There is no other way here.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to share with us before we close our conversation?
Sure. Just last bit, I think one has to recognize the extraordinary contributions that Indian Americans have made to this relationship from so many different angles. We discussed that a bit earlier, you being one of the major names, but there are so many others who have done the same thing, be it in the field of education at the university level, at the technological level, at science and R&D level, even politically, in terms of literature, in terms of show business. We are everywhere now. And it's
but we have to also recognize, Mayank, that it is America, inclusiveness and openness that provided the opportunity for all of us to succeed. These are the strength, values, and qualities America all of us can proudly and truly embrace.
Absolutely.
In fact, that doesn't exist in some part of the world.
And this is where America's exceptionalism should be applauded. It's remarkable.
And I wrote a book on exceptionalism.
I know. So one has to live here to recognize that. From a distance, it's difficult to gauge.
Very well said.
So, and unfortunately, not every Indian can live here. It's a difficult thing to migrate now. But I keep telling my friends back home that once you live here, you begin to, even small things like public libraries, for instance.
That's a good point you made.
And it's astonishing, in a small place like Naperville with a population of 150,000, there are
a library.
Fabulous libraries of the kind you wouldn't find in India. So these are the little details that one makes reference to all the time.
But we also had our darkest past, the way we treated the African American as well.
I mean, the US has a great deal to answer for. It continues. I mean, we are in the 20th anniversary of the Iraq War last week.
Right.
And
so
look
we
at
do
the
have
mess.
Our darkest and ugliest past in a sense.
Look at the mess they left behind.
They did. And the same thing with Afghanistan. I can go on and on.
Absolutely. Just to make one small point, when Iraq war was declared, at the president's level, I'm saying at the level of George W. Bush, they couldn't make a distinction between Shia and Sunni. They had no clue.
They don't have a clue. They still do not have a clue.
So my point is, if you act out of this staggering ignorance, you can see the result 20 years down the line.
You're absolutely right. Thank you very much. If you do come to Washington, D.C., come and visit us.
I would. And thank you so much. You've been very kind. I greatly appreciate your reaching out to me, and hopefully we'll meet soon.
Sure. And this is Frank Islam wishing you a great week. Thank you for watching.